As a DevOps engineer, you really need to embrace Linux. I know this is not easy to hear for the Windows fans out there. While you can run most of the popular DevOps tools directly inside Windows, you'll have a much better time running in a Linux environment. Fortunately, Microsoft has allowed Windows users to run a Linux VM in Windows 10 and higher. This is called Windows Subsystem for Linux, or WSL for short. In this video, I share with you my recommended setup as a DevOps engineer, running WSL2 in my Windows desktop. These video lectures that you'll see have been taken from my latest course, Terraform 101 Certified Terraform Associate. I'll leave a link to the course in the description below and at the top here. Do you have other alternative setups? Please share them with me in the comments section. And now, enjoy. Hi, welcome back. In this lecture, I want to talk to you about the Windows Subsystem for Linux, for Windows users. So let's get started. Now, this lecture is mainly for Windows users, of course. If you are a Mac user or a Linux user, feel free to skip ahead in the lectures and go directly to the lecture called Installing Terraform. But the majority of my students are usually using Windows, so that's why I want to make sure that you have a very good experience running Terraform and how you can do that using what we call WSL, which is a VM that Windows creates for you. And this actually is new. It started with Windows 10, and right here it tells you Windows 10 version 2004 and higher has this capability, and I love it. I've been using it for almost 2 years now, if not more, and it lets me develop in a Linux environment while using my Windows computer and not have to, go spin up a VM somewhere else. It works very, very well. So the first thing you want to do is go to this URL, and I will put it in the notes for this lecture as well. And it will tell you exactly how to install WSL, or Windows Subsystem for Linux. It's very, very easy. All you need to do is open your PowerShell as an administrator, and all you need to do is type WSL-install. So really quickly, I will show you what that looks like. So you can search here for PowerShell in your Windows environment, run as administrator, and accept the warning that comes up. And in here, all you need to do is type WSL-install. Now for me, it's for you it's gonna work right away, but for me, because I've already had it installed, it's really giving me the help menu, and you can see there's a lot of good documentation here about how to use the WSL command. So you can run WSL-help, will give you the exact same output that you saw here. With WSL install, if you just type WSL-install, it will install the Ubuntu distribution of Linux, which is what we want. So that's by default. If you want some other distribution, you can always specify that, -D and Debian, for example. But for the most part, Ubuntu works perfect. That is very simple. Just run that command, WSL-install, and you'll be good to go. You can also run the WSL-list, which is an interesting command. Let me show you what that does. And it will show you all the VMs that are running in your environment. So I got a Ubuntu here. That's the default. And then I have, let me make this a bit bigger so you can see. I've got the Ubuntu, I've got Rancher desktop, I've got Docker desktop, and we're going to talk about Docker desktop in just a little bit. But it's a wonderful solution that Microsoft has come up with, so we can develop inside of a Linux environment within Windows. Okay, very good. Now, you can continue to read through here, but this best practices for setting up a WSL development environment is what I'm going to show you next, because it's going to ask you for a username and password inside of this Linux environment that has nothing to do with your Windows username and password. So as you can see here, once the process of installing your Linux distribution with WSL is complete, it's going to ask you for a username and password specific to this Linux distribution. You can have multiple Linux distributions on your machine. It doesn't have to be just Ubuntu. And yeah, so you go ahead and do that. So it will show you something like this. Installing this may take a few minutes, and then it's going to ask you to create a default Unix user account. And this username does not need to match your Windows username. Okay, so you create it right here, and try to remember that password, because if you're going to run sudo commands, and sudo stands for super user do administrative commands that you're going to run, you're going to use that password that you just created here. So remember that password. If you do forget the password, there's a way to get that, and you can follow the instructions here to retrieve that password. And to update and upgrade packages, similar to what you would do in a regular Ubuntu Linux environment, so sudo apt update, sudo apt upgrade. So basically you just have a Linux VM running, so we don't need Oracle box or anything else of that nature. It's running native within Windows. Okay, so that's it for this lecture. And in the next lecture, we're going to talk about setting up the Windows terminal. So that will help us with what we just installed, WSL, but now we're going to use a Windows terminal. And I'll see you in the next lecture. Hi, welcome back. In the previous lecture, we talked about WSL for Windows users and how you can install that and get a VM that is a Linux VM that runs in your native Windows environment. Now, in this lecture, we're going to talk about the Windows terminal that Microsoft recommends to use with WSL. If you are a Mac user or a Linux user, you already have a terminal that comes built in within your operating system. But for Windows users, you can download and install this terminal, and we'll just see how in this lecture. All right. So in here, again, I'm going to reference this URL and put it in the lecture notes. But this is where you can install and get started setting up your Windows terminal. There is a button here you can click on to install the Windows terminal, and this will take you to the Microsoft Store, where you can get Windows terminal directly from here and install it. So it's very simple, very straightforward to do. So I'll let you go ahead and install that. So you can pause the video, install your Windows terminal. That's the easiest way to do it. There are other ways, again, like Chocolati or Scoop, that you can do or you can use, but this is the easiest to just get it from the Microsoft Store. And once you're done, I will show you a little bit of what the terminal looks like. So I have it here. This is the icon at the bottom. And let me pull it up and make it a little bit bigger. So there are a lot of things you can do here. By default, once you install it, you're going to have the different environments that you can run. So I can open a Windows PowerShell environment like that. So I'm right on my PowerShell. I can run a command prompt. I can run a Ubuntu Linux session. So I'm right on my Linux VM that's inside the Windows environment. This is the WSL environment that we just talked about before. So you really have all these very cool features. You can see you can add tabs. You can take a look at your settings and play around with the appearance, change the theme. Here I'm using the Windows theme. You can have a light theme, a dark theme, change your colors, color schemes, and so on. So it's a very powerful terminal and very nice to use. I've been using it again for 2 years on my Windows machine. It works very, very well. You can use the shortcut Control-Shift-P, and that opens a window here where you can look at different things like duplicating a tab and the shortcut associated with that, Control-Shift-D, finding something, Control-Shift-F. So you can go ahead and take a look at all the different functions and features, and once you're done, you can come back and we can resume our lectures. That's pretty much all I wanted to share with you in this lecture. Once you have your Windows terminal ready to go, then we'll move on to the next lecture. I'll see you soon. Hi, welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to talk about installing Git for Windows users. Let's get started. Now the good news is, if you followed the previous lectures and installed your Windows Subsystem for Linux distribution and used Ubuntu, you get Git installed for free. So it's very simple, very easy. So why do I want to share this with you? Well, you may want in the future to update Git, so you can run this command sudo apt-get install Git, and that can update Git to a newer version. And then once you do that, you can go ahead and configure your Git environment by running these two commands: git config -- global .username, your name, and the same thing .user email and your email address. So if you've run Git before in the past using something like Git bash, you'll need this inside of your WSL environment, so we can run again just like a native Linux environment and run everything within this VM. So that's it for this lecture. Very straightforward, very simple, and I will see you in the next one. Hi, welcome back. In this lecture, we're going to look at using Visual Studio Code in a WSL environment. So if you are using Mac or if you're using Linux, you can go ahead and download Visual Studio Code, no problem. If you're using Windows, I want to show you how to use Visual Studio Code inside WSL as opposed to using Visual Studio Code directly on Windows. So let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so once again, if you go to this URL, which I will share in the notes for this lecture, it shows you how to install Visual Studio Code and use it with Windows Subsystem for Linux. So here it gives you some of the benefits of doing that. And installing VS Code is very easy. You just go to the VS Code install page. This will take us here, and you need to download for Windows. Although we're going to use it with a Linux VM, you still want to download it for Windows. Okay, so you go ahead and click that button, download Visual Studio Code. Next step is, when prompted to select additional tasks during installation, be sure to check the Add to Path option so you can easily open a folder in WSL using the code command. Okay, so this is important to do. And then finally, install the Remote Development Extension Pack. This extension pack has a few extensions: the Remote WSL extension, the Remote SSH, Remote Containers extensions. Is very helpful, very good to have within Visual Studio Code. And you can of course install it from here, or once you've installed Visual Studio Code, you can get it from the extensions within Visual Studio Code itself. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. And there are two ways to open a project inside of Visual Studio Code. From the command line, you can go ahead and type code and then dot. That will take you, or will open Visual Studio Code at the particular location inside wherever you are right now in the folder structure. And then the second way is to open VS Code and then type Control-Shift-P, and then you can type Remote WSL, and then it gives you a bunch of things you can do. So you can open a folder with Remote WSL, for example. So let's go ahead and take a look at and see what that looks like. So first thing I'm going to do, since I already have Visual Studio Code installed, so what you can do, as I mentioned, you can go to a particular folder path. In this case, I'm using my Windows terminal that we saw how to install in a previous lecture. So I'm really inside the Linux VM's file structure. And here all I need to do, if you see, I'm going to ls within the Terraform 101 folder, and I can see a couple of things here. I want to open this inside of Visual Studio Code, so all I need to do is type code space dot, and that opens Visual Studio Code for me right here. And the neat thing, and this is my preferred way of opening Visual Studio Code, is it takes you directly to the path, or directly to the folder where you want to open it. The other way, of course, I'll show you as well, is that you can open Visual Studio Code and then go to the particular folder that you're interested in. And the one thing you'll note here is at the bottom in green, it says WSL Ubuntu, so you know that you've opened it into the proper distribution. and that's it. You can see that I have my Visual Studio Code running right here with the folder that I decided to open it in, the Terraform 101 folder, and all my folder structure is right here. Now, when you install Visual Studio Code, you could go ahead and go to the Extensions tab. So what you can do in the Extensions tab here, you can search for Remote, and that should give you a bunch of options. You can see the individual extensions, but if you go to Remote Development, that is an extension pack. It has three extensions, the Remote WSL being one of them, Remote Containers, and Remote SSH. So this is the one that that's the one I recommend that you would install inside of Visual Studio Code. And from here, you'll be able to use this extension. And the other way of opening a folder is to hit Control-Shift-P and then just type Remote WSL. And what you can do is you can, let's see, open folder in WSL, and it takes you to your folder structure. Since I'm in Terraform 101, I'm going to try Vault 201 here and hit OK. Let's see. And that's it. Once again, it's opening a remote at the bottom. And the extension pack that we downloaded, it can also give you the ability to remote into a container, and you can work with Visual Studio Code inside of a container, which is also helpful. Or you can also SSH into a remote VM, maybe in AWS, and you want to use Visual Studio Code to develop inside of a VM running in AWS using SSH. So that's also available. So once again, we're right here inside of the Vault 201 course. So you can see we can open all our folders within here, and it works very well, and it's working within WSL within our VM inside of Windows. Hopefully this has been helpful, and I will see you in the next lecture. Hi, in this lecture I wanted to talk about how to install and run Docker within your WSL2 environment for Windows users. So let's get started. Now once again, this is specific to Windows users, and the documentation is found here. This URL I will save in the notes for this lecture. So historically, when you downloaded Docker for desktop for Windows, it spun up a Hyper-V VM. The recommendation from Docker now is to use WSL, which we've already installed, to run Docker, which is great. So this is a guide to show you how to set up Docker Desktop for Windows with WSL2 or the Windows Subsystem for Linux version 2. And it's pretty simple. You go to the download page for Docker Desktop, you download it for Windows, and once it's installed, all you need to do is go to the settings and check a box that the WSL2 based engine will use, and also make sure the integration is there. So you can pause the video and look at your Docker Desktop install page. Go ahead and install it if you haven't already, and come back and I will show you what my configuration looks like. Okay, so here is Docker Desktop, and if you go to the top, there's the gear box for settings, and once you hit the gear icon, under General, you can see use the WSL2 based engine, and this is gives you better performance than the legacy Hyper-V backend, so go ahead and check that. The next thing is to go to Resources, and under WSL integration, make sure that you have enable integration with my default WS distribution. You may have other distributions here as well that you can select. So mine is the Ubuntu, so whether I select this or not doesn't matter because that's my default. But you can also add other distributions that you might have so that you can run Docker with it. And that's pretty much it. You apply, you restart Docker, and things are good. You can then test it by going to your terminal. And once again, I'm inside my Ubuntu VM, inside of Windows Terminal, and you can run Docker version. And right away you can see the client side and the server side for Docker, and now we have Docker running within our WSL2 environment. And that's it for this lecture. And there you have it, folks. That's my recommended way to develop in Linux when you're running in a Windows environment. I hope you enjoyed these few lectures, and I hope that you would embrace Linux and not be afraid to learn another operating system if you're coming from a Windows background. I'll see you in another video.